Rick.
Yes, Marsela, this is such an amazing gathering that you've
gosh.
helped us to create.
Welcome to Sarajevo. I mean,
Yeah.
we're just so thrilled to have you here. I have no words. So what I want to ask you so many things, but how do you like Sarajevo, and maybe what feels different or special coming here? And also, we have such a diverse group of people that we just spent the week with. So maybe I'll start there.
Yeah. Well, what feels so special, I would say, about the gathering that we've just had is the people from so many different countries that were at war with each other, but the people that have come here are all about healing the trauma from that war. And so it's about how silly sometimes it seems about all the fights between different leaders in different countries, when if you get the people together, then they work together without those kind of hatreds. But also what I'm just learning is just about how much of the damage from the war from 30 years ago is still alive here for the people. So I didn't quite understand, you think war is over and what's the leftover, and people are now more at peace. But even coming here, Sarah was sort of a little bit concerned about saying certain things because she thought that the driver was about, might be upset about some of the conversations we had.
Yes. Driving you from the Republica, from the other part, from Yahorina, coming down to Sarajevo. Yes.
Yeah. So just the legacy of the struggles before and the wars before, how it's still alive for so many people. I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, no, it's so true. The wound is very much alive and open, and I don't think the bleeding has stopped yet.
Yeah.
So I probably a good segue into what has been your experience specifically and MAPS working with war veterans and war trauma. And maybe, other civilians affected by war trauma. How effective can this treatment, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, be when it comes to veterans specifically and civilians?
Yeah, well, one of the best stories I could share of how effective psychedelic therapy, in particular MDMA-assisted therapy, can be for war veterans is that we had someone in our study in America who had PTSD from Vietnam. So he had PTSD for over 50 years, half a century, and he was still able to get better. That's the most amazing part for me, is that you can take someone who's been traumatized, who's been disabled in different ways, severe PTSD for half a century, tried all sorts of different things, different medications, different therapies, but still the possibility for healing is there.
Right. Even 50 years later.
Even 50 years later. So the other part of this is that we have achieved in America something that's very rare right now, is that America is now split up. It's very partisan. Everything is culture wars. But the reemergence of psychedelics into the culture is a bipartisan project, that we don't have the right wing saying no and the left wing saying yes, or the other way around. Somehow, because of the work with veterans, we have been able to bring the healing potential of psychedelics to our culture without there being a backlash, at least so far. And so one of the most amazing things for people that don't know American politics, that we've had some of the most extreme Trumpish people. One guy is named Matt Gaetz. And then AOC is a woman who's a young, very progressive Democrat.
Yeah.
So we had a bill to support psychedelics introduced into the House of Representatives, co-sponsored by Matt Gaetz and AOC. The people on the far extremes have both come together. And then we have a lot of people in the middle as well. And so for us, the strategy, you could say, of how do you bring something suppressed is you go to where the pain is, and you go to where people have not been able to get healing in other ways. And if we can bring healing there, then we can build support in the whole society. And so that was kind of a conscious plan to pick PTSD and MDMA as what we thought would most make it through the system first, the regulatory system, because we had sympathetic people that would be healed, that all branches of society were supportive. Now, one of the biggest issues, because we're here with Bella, who was in charge of trauma for the Israeli Ministry of Health. We had one of the training of the psychiatrists that sort of taught us a really important lesson about our training, that there was a part that we weren't fully communicating. So this psychiatrist asked this question. He said, "I understand what you're trying to do now, and so this is just for victims. It's not for perpetrators." And we said, "No, that's not the way it is at all. Perpetrators have an even harder time sometimes to forgive themselves, to make progress, to deal with what they've did. So that this is both for victims and for perpetrators, this healing." And so what we find, a lot of the people that are the veterans that we've been working with in America, a lot of their trauma is not just when they were hurt or victims, but then when they were perpetrators themselves. And we have this whole category now called moral injury. That's, we have a lot of people that lost a lot of friends, have got wounded working in Afghanistan. And what we see now, Afghanistan is worse off than when we started with the Taliban. As women are more repressed, and actually they've had a bit of freedom, and now it's even harder to be repressed. So people are wondering, why did we do that? And so this question about what was the purpose of war? What was the purpose of the sacrifice? It's a burden on them and also on the whole society. And so I think we've found that with veterans who have both sometimes killed innocent people or have had friends killed, that the healing potential of what we're trying to bring forth is not just for victims, and people are sometimes both victims and perpetrators. And we've got a very fractured society right now, but it's been amazing to see that through our work with veterans, and also now we're expanding to veterans' families, that's been the way for everyone in our society to say yes to, let's see more about the healing potential of psychedelics.
Yeah, no, I love that, and how you talked about it as kind of, ways to look for common ground and bridge, rather than this time of division, how important it can also be for collective healing.
I'm starting to find too that the common ground that we've built on healing people, that other people, their loved ones and stuff, when you start building common ground about that kind of healing, then you can also build on that to start talking about the things that you disagree with. And I think that's what I've been learning more recently, is that the common ground is strong enough that we can start talking about more difficult ways in which we're divided. So I've done that sort of, we had a dinner for 1,000 veterans at our big psychedelic science conference. And
just now in Denver
in June. And most of them are Republicans. So a lot of the veterans tend to be more Republican, more conservative. And yet I was able, through one of my talks, to talk about a little bit of challenging Trump for talking about having bone spurs and trying to get out of the war. And, so I was basically talking about Trump as a selfish person. And I was able to say that and get even a good response, because these are all veterans that had volunteered and they know what it means to run away or to really volunteer. And so that for me was one of the high points of the whole conference, is that it was just a moment, but it was where I was starting to see, can we use this common ground to talk about more difficult issues? And I felt that it was welcome, that I could.
That's kind of start hearing each other.
Yeah.
That's great. I think know the answer myself, but for whoever will be listening to this, I wanted to ask you, how does MAPS adapt its approach to kind of other places and cultural differences? We've been exploring that in depth, I think, at the conference as well, but maybe if you can talk a little bit about that and your work elsewhere in Europe and other places.
Okay, well, there's one story that immediately...
And what's different, maybe?
Yeah, one story immediately comes to mind. Not so much about how we've adapted, but just about cultural differences. So that one of our supporters was a very big financial success in China, in the early internet in China, and came to America. And now he wants to help with the Chinese. And he says his parents and their whole generation all has PTSD from the Cultural Revolution. And so he wanted to bring MDMA to China. And so I've been to China to meet with psychiatrists, both civilian and military psychiatrists. Others from our team have done that. And we brought 12 Chinese therapists to one of our training with 2 live translators. We had these little booths with the translators and everything. It was incredible. And there was one of the therapy videos that was where it was about a woman who had been sexually abused by her stepfather. And then the stepfather and mother had gotten divorced, and the stepfather lived in some village that wasn't that far away. But she went through terrible trauma from the stepfather. And the discussions, though, that were in the video were about how this woman wanted to tell her husband what the trauma was from, but she was worried that if she were to tell her husband what happened, that he would want to go and hurt or kill the stepfather. And so it was a discussion with the therapists about how to communicate this, because her husband really had no idea why she was so traumatized and what was going on. And so the Chinese women, 2 of the Chinese women psychiatrists that were watching this said that they were surprised so much, because they said in China, if a woman talks about being sexually abused by anybody, she's the problem. And that they would kick her out of the family, and that it was so
not just in China, yes, but absolutely.
Yeah. So it was just like so that was just a stark cultural difference. But how do we adapt it? So you know, also here at the training, you know, we've had a woman from Lebanon who's a therapist in Lebanon, and you know, it's taught by Israelis. You know, it's amazing that what this woman from Lebanon said, that talking to an Israeli in Lebanon would be seen as like being a traitor. But what she was saying is that in Lebanon, that if our main therapeutic approach uses a 2-person team, and usually male-female. So she said if it's a female patient, you couldn't have a male therapist. You'd have to have 2 women therapists. You know, similarly, if it's a man, they wouldn't want a woman therapist. You'd have to have 2 men therapists.
Absolutely, yes.
So those are the kind of things.
Those are the kind of things that can be tweaked and worked on.
But then there's a whole other aspect of it, which is in some cultures, if something bad happens to you, and I think when there's cultures that are just so constantly filled with violence and trauma and things like that, it's more like it's your fate. You just have to accept it. So this idea that you can move through trauma to become more whole again, a lot of cultures don't even have that concept. It's just, this is what's happened to you, and just accept it, and you know, push it away and don't talk about it. And there's no path towards feeling integrated again about it. So I think there's a lot of one of the other parts too is our therapy is about trying to help empower people to realize that they're the ones that are healing themselves. We're trying to create a context where they are supported, where the MDMA also adds support, but they have to heal themselves. There's certain kind of people that don't want to do that. They want to be, you know, healed by the outside force. They don't want to do their own work. So we have to figure out which cultures are like that and how we work in those kind of situations. And maybe it doesn't even work there. I think the other part that's going to be most important is that just the concept of therapists and psychiatrists. Like we heard a woman here was talking about Rwanda.
Yes.
You know, they don't have psychiatrists and therapists in Rwanda.
No.
I mean, these are those few that they had got killed, or, you know, so how are we going to bring out the healing potential of MDMA in cultures where they don't have these kind of roles that we do? We'll have to find different kind of local healers that there are always people that people go to talk to, but they don't have the necessary credentials. So that's, I think, what we're going to have to adapt. The other big part is like here, as we're hearing, with the siege of Sarajevo or in other places, the Ukrainian refugees, that you have whole families that are traumatized at the same time. And so how are we going to work with them? You could just pick the adults, but what about the kids? So I think we're going to have to find new models to treat families as a whole, meaning potentially give MDMA to parents and children who now may be adults or whatever age, but that there's a lot of new models that we're going to have to develop if our goal really is to go where the trauma is and to try to do our best to reduce it. We are required by the FDA, if they approve MDMA for PTSD for prescription use for adults, which is going to be 18 or over, we must do studies in adolescents. And if that works, we must do studies in down to 7-year-olds. So we haven't started any of that yet.
But this can actually happen with the parents and the children.
It can. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's, I think, a big thing. The other part is that it's a expensive intervention. And so where there's good national health care or insurance, because a lot of people can't afford the amount of therapy time and the drug that they would need. So we're also going to have to adapt to places where, it's just too expensive for healthcare, or how are we going to do that? A lot of it, I think, will be through drug policy reform, through trying to get through legalization and then train people in peer support. But that's going to happen. And then the other part, I think, that's so difficult is some cultures do have traditions that go back a long time of using psychedelics, but in many parts of the world that's been wiped out for a very long time. So if we go to some cultures or even some places where they think about all they've heard about drugs is like MDMA is just ecstasy, a party drug, and there's no examples in their culture anymore about psychedelics for healing, it's an entirely new concept.
Right.
And so that's going to be difficult.
No drugs, even psilocybin or mushrooms, if none of that is considered as something that can enhance healing. That's the situation here in the Balkans currently as well. Absolutely.
So people don't see psychedelics as having historical, spiritual, or therapeutic potential.
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. But I do think, like what you were saying, about cultural adaptations, that concept of inner healing and inner wisdom, I think we all have it in different cultures. It's just at different stages, and in some instances it's just been buried very, very deeply. So that's why I'm excited about exploring how to do it here in the Balkans, and so excited to have you here. One question I have for you, informally, maybe not the MAPS position. I just wanted to ask, what is your view with regard the spiritual and energy dimension in the psychedelic work? And you inspired this question by talking about the Parliament of the World Religions that you recently attended. And I was so kind of really very enthused to hear about that work. And also kind of like the, net zero trauma by 2070. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, Rick.
Well, I think the way to start by talking about that is, what is the goal? What really got me involved in psychedelics? What kind of world do I want to see? And how I think psychedelics would help with that. So the goal that we have is what we're calling mass mental health and a spiritualized humanity. And maybe I should go back one step further to say that I did have this series of psychedelic experiences. For me, Jewish, the first one, it was 2 days in a row. The first day was trying DMT for the first time. And I was blasted into this being part of everything, and everything's part of me, and how beautiful this all was. And then I thought, if I'm part of everything and everything part of me, then Hitler is a part of me too. It's not just the evil is out there. And that was like this shattering experience to sort of acknowledge the truth of that we all have our own inner dominator and people that aren't listening, parts of us that don't listen to others. The second day was ketamine, and I had an experience, and these are all with psychedelic therapists around. And so with the ketamine, I was actually watching Hitler give us, somehow I went back to the same theme, and I'm watching Hitler give a speech, like a Nuremberg rally, and that's the mass sort of psychosis, you could say, almost, and hysteria, which is in some ways very spiritual. The spiritual aspect, I think, of what Hitler was so good at doing was helping people feel they're all part of one thing, something bigger. And so I got this different sense of the Heil Hitler salute. And so I saw him doing like Heil Hitler, and then everybody would do it back to him. And then I felt like he would do it again, and it was like this vibration. So it was the one to the many giving the power to the one, and this vibration
it's like a trance of some sort.
Yeah, very much. And so I was thinking, how do we get into Hitler's head? How do I do that? How do I try to make it so he doesn't want to do this? Or we always think about it, if the leaders can change, then it'll be a much better world. And what I realized from that there's no way that Hitler wouldn't want to, is not ready, there's no way for me to change Hitler's mind. You have to be willing. I mean, we know that from psychedelic therapy. People have to make the first move. They have to be open to it.
Yes.
Then I realized that all the people that were giving away their power to Hitler were getting less from it than him. And so really the long-term strategy for a more peaceful world is to take all those people that are motivated by dictators based on fear or anxieties, things, and then give away their power, that we have to empower them. So the strategy for a better world is not to have a few enlightened leaders. There's always going to be new psychopaths that come up. It has to be mass mental health and a spiritualized humanity. So that's the goal of bringing psychedelics forth. We talk a lot about MDMA for PTSD or Ibogaine for opiate addiction or whatever, but the larger goal is to transform how people think of each other. And this other parts, I'll just say, like we have technology. Our brilliance of our mind has so exceeded the emotional and spiritual capacity we need to handle the technology. So you even talked about global warming here in Sarajevo, where it's not as much snow. Everything's changing. The whole world is changing, and we're not really reacting in the speed that we need to react to avoid a lot of damage, even more damage than we have now. So there's some estimates that there's potentially 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. All right. So I think this sense about how do we accelerate this emotional and spiritual growth in order to help humanity as a whole come to collective strategies and to see each other as fundamentally the same as them, with this idea of diversity as a strength. Yes, to see that
a neighborhood as like a very
it was
close.
But this idea too, that
local
we have more in
communities.
common with people than we have different, and so all of that means again that our strategy is both drug development and drug policy reform, so that these tools can be available not just to people who have a diagnosis, but to everybody who's sort of suffering under just seeing what's happening to the world. All right. So all of that then, in terms of net zero trauma as a goal, the reason that's something that I've been speaking about is because for 37 years and a half now, MAPS has been about trying to make MDMA into a medicine, and trying to bring psychedelics up from the underground and have them. And so it looks like we're on a good track to make that happen. We hope by May 2024 that MDMA will be approved by the FDA. Psilocybin by other people will be a couple years later. There's also all sorts of work with 5-MeO-DMT and all these different drugs. And so I think this idea of just making these things into a medicine, it's not accomplished yet, but it's looking that way. So then we needed a new vision. What's going to really happen over the next couple generations? And so that new vision is this idea that people are able to be manipulated based on their fears and their anxieties, and they see the world through their past trauma. So if we can reduce the amount of trauma that is that people experience, and we also know multi-generational trauma, how trauma through epigenetics is passed down.
Yes, and
yeah. So I anticipate, just by looking at the news, that the world is going to get more stressful rather than less stressful over the next 20 years. We're having proliferation of nuclear weapons. We've got crazy people in North Carolina that, the idea of mutual assured destruction only works when people don't want to commit suicide. But we've got a lot of people that would rather die and kill others than.
Yes.
All right. So we've got somehow or other to help people see the world in a more clear way by processing their past trauma. So net zero trauma doesn't mean no trauma. And some people confuse that, I guess, when I explain it. It just means that we're not adding to the collective.
Trauma. Yeah.
There'll always be new trauma, but the collective amount of trauma that's going to be increasing over the next couple decades potentially. Ever more effective weapons of war and all of that. How do we make it so that we don't keep adding? And so net zero trauma just means we're not adding. It's a whole different thing than to take the trauma that we have then built up and then try to reduce that. So we're not even talking about reducing the total burden. We're just talking about not adding to it every year. And there always will be trauma. Trauma is part of life. There's always going to be death. There's always going to be accidents. There's always going to be diseases. There's always going to be hatred. So I think this idea of net zero trauma communicates that we have a lot of work collectively to do. And if we don't do that over the next, 45, 50 years, we may destroy ourselves, and we're already massively destroying the environment and animals and the oceans, and things are changing, like cosmic things are changing. I mean, the flow of the ocean waters, so many stuff that's taken, billions of years to come to this point, we're altering. So I think we need help for people to process the terror of what we're doing, not to be overwhelmed by it, and then start trying to work together to reduce it. So that's the idea of net zero trauma
by 2070.
By 2070, because I think it's also important to realize things like this don't change that quickly. I mean, we need to. It's like an ocean liner, and they say that it takes a long time.
It takes a long time to turn that big ship, yes.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's going to take a couple generations, because we also want to be, reducing multi-generational trauma. And then this idea of a spiritualized humanity. It's interesting that when I talk about that, it's not that different from what a lot of the astronauts have been saying when they go up to look at the Earth from space. So I think humanity as a whole is on this. It's a struggle in a way between the emerging new worldview about how we're all in it together and we're part of the spiritual process, and we don't need to be scared of death in the same way. That each religion is not the only one right religion. People kill each other for that over time. So spiritualized humanity means that we really understand our place in the universe, and that we understand the short period of time that we have to use it as best as possible. So these two combinations of spiritualized humanity and net zero trauma, but it's spiritual in a more symbolic, metaphorical way than in a literal way. And I think as we think about what is the most difficult challenge of getting to this place of a spiritualized humanity, it's the sort of fundamentalists from all the different religions who are holding on super tight with this idea that they've got the one right religion, and that God is on their side, and that it's also not very loving, a lot of things. The ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel are horrible about the Palestinians. The ultra-Orthodox Christians, Catholics and Protestants have for so long killed each other, and the Sunnis and Shiites are fighting. And so we have to help people, I think, understand that there's a spiritual connection that we all share, and that I think the best way for me at least, to think about religion is like languages. There's German, here's French, here's all these different languages. but
like cultural manifestations almost, like, but really,
and it's not like I'm going to kill you because you speak French and I speak English, or it's not my language is better than yours. They're different. They have different flavors.
Yeah.
And I think people can experience that. The Parliament of the World Religions was formed, I think, in 1893 at the Chicago Fair, the World's Fair in Chicago, and it was people from different religions coming together to talk about what they share in common. But it tends to be those religions that are persecuted. So the Baha'i faith and the Sufis, the sort of mystical branches of the Islam, they're persecuted in much of the Islamic world. And so they were well represented at the Parliament of the World Religions. So we didn't have Catholic representatives. We had people that were Catholic, but
but not the major,
not any of these major religions being part of this, trying to find common ground.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, and made me think of like what you're suggesting, almost as a bottom-up approach, coming from people, not the leaders, and people healing themselves personally, and then kind of spreading that in a collective way to help heal the world and the planet.
I think that if you rely on leaders, it's going to be not going to work. So we look at
clearly not working.
So many of the leaders in America have sacrificed their principles because they think, quote, the base.
Yeah.
That's, at least in the Republican side, is so pro-Trump that we have now all sorts of leaders that have abandoned democracy and have endorsed very hateful kind of things because that's what they think the base of people that vote will support. So we have to change the base in order to get the leaders that we want.
It's almost like a grassroots activism, sort of
Yeah, and at the same time, I have a PhD from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and I try to work with leaders. So we need
everything, but it's also the concept. The bottom line concept is also that it needs to be done that way.
Yes, it needs to be the grassroots up.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick, so much.
Always
a pleasure.
Yeah, and I drank the water here, so I look forward to coming back to Sarajevo and to see what we can do with bringing psychedelic research to Bosnia, and
with maps, with what we're doing with Healing Balkans here, and just the larger movement as well. I think it's kind of already spreading. So
and just this has been some of the most incredible moments for me these last couple of days. Just I mean, what I was saying to Natalie, who's the one therapist from Lebanon.
Yes.
That I have my great-great-grandmother moved to Palestine in 1904. She was a refugee from Russia in 1880, moved to Chicago. Her family made a success. She moved to Palestine. My family then, her children moved in 23. Their house in Israel, in Tel Aviv, we no longer own it, but it's a historical site. But I've always been kind of scared about Arabs. That's what I was trained. Arabs tried to wipe out Israel in 48. So I've tried to start research in Jordan, and I was really scared the first time I went to Jordan because I'm just thinking, where am I? And but when I told Natalie, I said, I'm even more scared to go to Lebanon. That's been they don't even let anybody with an Israeli passport into Lebanon.
The Israelis told me when they first came, they were so kind of spooked and scared. There was somebody from Lebanon because they said they don't talk to us.
Yeah.
They won't even talk to us. And I said, no, I think they will talk to you here.
To see her break down in tears.
Yes.
After some very powerful emotional work, but then to see some of the Israelis supporting her.
Absolutely.
It was just beautiful.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, to see Sergei from Armenia, give a speech to the Ukrainians that they may think Ukrainian, government is, that the Armenians are more on the side of the Russians.
Yes.
But he said, no, that's not the case, but we are certainly here in sympathy with the Ukrainians. So it was like a little United Nations, United Religions, but...
Absolutely, it was, and may it continue in a good way and spread from here.
Yeah.
Healing Balkans, that we started that with a similar idea, really, that people will come together even from the warring parties, and then we can start to talk about trauma, because it has not been talked about as much. And that's why 30 years later, we're still at a very wounded and vulnerable place. And then from there, and make this place what we think is meant to be, a place of love, of diversity. Bosnia has been known for that, over the centuries. So we think that mission and vision is very aligned with what MAPS has been doing, and that's why kind of natural partners in a sense. So that's really why we're so happy to have you here, and to have the training here, and to bring people from all over the Balkans to participate in the training together with everyone else.
Yeah. So how do you see the reaction of like the Bosnian government, the Serbian government towards moving forward with this kind of research?
I like to think of it as when you were describing common ground, very much like what you were talking about, the two sides of the aisle in the United States. The same thing with my other work, which is rivers and protection of rivers. And we have wild rivers here, the last ones in Europe. So that was a place where people from all the different sides came together, because rivers connect us. They flow through all of our kind of countries and former countries, and people depend on them. So when the rivers were under attack from these, the onslaught of mini hydropower plants, thousands of them, people just came together. They didn't kind of care about nationality anymore or religion. They wanted to protect the rivers. So I think of this work as being very much the same way. And who wouldn't want to heal and help their veterans heal? That's how we think about approaching our government. And we also think that trauma is more present here maybe than anywhere else in the world. Our trauma is fresh. And yet it's still continuing 30 years later. And then it's intergenerational, and then it's also ancestral. We had so much conflict here. So it's a great place to start addressing that in very deep ways, and working with the governments, whoever will listen to that and want to kind of, move from here to a better place, because I don't know what else we can expect, if we don't do that. Things are not going so well. So just like what you were saying, with individuals, empowering them, nobody's coming from the outside to do that work for them. The psychedelics can really help with that. They're just doing their inner work and seeing the world in a different way, maybe a little bit, but also opening themselves up so that they can take action and act for a better world, and kind of exit from that state of long apathy, which is what we've had here ever since the war ended, because we haven't dealt with trauma. So that's the work. And I think it's not just that it has potential. I don't think we have a choice. We've come to this place kind of like a dead end, that I think we really have to bring some hope and kind of to young people, to all people, and move together from that place. So that's really the idea behind it.
Yeah, and I'm very moved by what you just said about this idea that we can't wait for somebody from the outside to come and do all this work. We really have to do it ourselves. And it reminded me of one of the most favorite movies when I was a young boy growing up. And it was called The Day the Earth Stood Still. Do you know that movie?
No.
Oh my God, it's incredible.
Okay.
But it's about how a spaceship, aliens come to the U.S., come and land in different places around. It's very funny to see this movie, the primitive kind of special effects and stuff. But the idea is that these aliens come and they have a message for all the people of the Earth, that they've been watching us, and that we're, they just seen the first nuclear weapon. And they said that we think you're potentially a danger to the universe, and you guys got to solve your problems, or else we're going to do something. And then, as a way to demonstrate their power, all the engines, all the motors stop for a whole day, for a period of time. So it's like the day the Earth stood still. But it's this hope, I think, that somebody from outer space will come and save us, and will tell us that we got to stop killing each other. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to have to figure out ourselves.
with a lot of courage, to kind of
Yeah.
move from this place and go there together, hopefully. Thank you for that. And,
Yeah.
welcome to Sarajevo.
Yes, and I'm so glad
Please
to
do
work
come
with
back
Healing
soon.
Balkans to bring healing here. And as you say, some things that happen in the Balkans spread around the world. So
I believe it. Sarajevo is also that focal point, but also the Balkans is such a place. So thank you